I never thought a phone call could change everything I believed about my own father. My mother collapsed in our kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, and by the time I got to the ER, machines were beeping around her. Then the doctor walked in, looked at my father standing by her bed, and froze. "Wait," he said quietly. "I know you, but that's not your name."
My name's Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. I teach 3rd grade at Ridgeline Elementary, right outside a small town in Colorado called Aspen Hollow. It's the kind of place where everybody waves at everybody, where the biggest news of the month is usually about a bear getting into somebody's trash cans. My parents, Carol and David Whitfield, had lived there longer than I'd been alive. Dad ran a small hardware store on Main Street. Mom volunteered at the library on Thursdays. They were, as far as I knew, about as ordinary as people get. That Tuesday started like any other. I was grading spelling tests when my phone rang. It was Dad, and his voice didn't sound like him at all. "Sarah," just my name. Nothing else for a second. "Your mom collapsed. I'm calling 911. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember the drive. I just remember pulling into the ER parking lot and running through those sliding doors like the building itself might swallow her whole. They'd already taken her back. A nurse pointed me toward a set of double doors, and I pushed through them so fast I nearly knocked over a cart of supplies. My father was standing near the bed, gripping the metal rail like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Mom's face was pale, an oxygen mask over her nose and mouth, wires running from her chest to a monitor that kept beeping in a rhythm I didn't like. "What happened?" I asked, my voice cracking. She went down," Dad said. One second she was making coffee, and the next she was on the floor. A doctor came in a moment later. Youngish guy, maybe 40, with tired eyes and a name tag that read Dr. Alan Reyes. He moved efficiently, checking the monitors, asking the nurse for vitals, all business. Then he turned to introduce himself to my father, the way doctors do when they need family history. "I'm Dr. Reyes. Are you her husband?" "Yes," Dad said. David Whitfield." That's when it happened. Dr. Reyes went still. Not dramatically, just a small pause, the kind you'd miss if you weren't watching closely. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he was trying to place a face he hadn't seen in years. He glanced at my father's hands, then back up to his face. "Wait," he said slowly. "I know you." He shook his head like he was arguing with himself. "But that's not your name." My father's expression did something I'd never seen before. For 28 years I'd watched that face laugh at my jokes, tear up at my college graduation, soften every time my mother walked into a room. I'd never once seen it go blank like that. Like every drop of color had been drained out from underneath. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Dad said, but his voice had changed. And so had the air in that room. Dr. Reyes didn't push it. Not right then. He had a patient to stabilize, and my mother's blood pressure was still doing something the machines didn't like. He turned back to her, called out numbers to the nurse, ordered a second 4-line. For a few minutes, it was just noise and motion in my mother's chest, rising and falling under that mask. But I couldn't stop looking at my father. He'd moved to the corner of the room, arms crossed tight over his chest, staring at the floor like he was trying to disappear into the tile. In 28 years, I had never once seen David Whitfield look small. He coached my softball team. He gave the toast at every family wedding. He was the guy who shook everyone's hand at church like he'd known them his whole life. Small was not a word that belonged to him. "Dad," I whispered, stepping closer. "What was that about?" "Nothing," he said, too fast. "The man's mistaken. People look like other people." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But something in my chest had gone cold. The same kind of cold you feel right before you step onto ice that might not hold you. Mom stabilized about 20 minutes later. They said it looked like a cardiac event, possibly stress-related, but they wanted to keep her overnight for observation and run more tests in the morning. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand while she drifted in and out, groggy from the sedatives. My father stood by the window the entire time, watching the parking lot like he expected someone to walk out of it. Around 8 that night, I stepped into the hallway to get coffee from the vending machine, and that's when I saw Dr. Reyes again. He was leaning against the nurse's station, filling out a chart, but when he noticed me, he set the clipboard down. "Miss Whitfield?" he asked. "Actually, it's Mitchell now, but yes." He hesitated, glancing down the hallway toward my mother's room. "Can I ask you something? Off the record?" My stomach tightened. "Okay. Your father," he said carefully. "How long have you known him as David Whitfield?" "My whole life." "He's my dad." Dr. Reyes nodded slowly, like he was turning something over in his mind, deciding how much to say. "I did my residency in Billings, Montana, about 15 years ago. There was a man there, worked at a construction company, real friendly guy. Everybody liked him, had a wife and a little girl." He paused. "He disappeared. Just packed up and vanished one weekend. No note, no goodbye. The wife came into the ER I was working at, hysterical, saying he'd cleaned out their bank account and left. My hands had gone numb around the coffee cup. I could be wrong," Dr. Reyes said. "It's been a long time, and memory plays tricks, but I've never forgotten that man's face. And your father just gave me the same one." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the vinyl recliner beside my mother's bed, staring at the ceiling tiles, replaying Dr. Reyes's words over and over. A wife and a little girl, a disappearance, a cleaned-out bank account. None of it fit the man who taught me to ride a bike in the church parking lot, who cried at my wedding, who called me Sarah Bear even now that I had a kid of my own. But it also wouldn't leave me alone. The next morning, Mom was stronger, sitting up, asking for real food instead of iced chips. Dad had gone quiet in a way that felt less like grief and more like waiting. He kept checking his phone. He kept glancing at the door every time it opened. "I'm going to run home and grab you some things," I told Mom, kissing her forehead. She squeezed my hand and told me not to worry, that she felt fine, that I was fussing too much. I didn't tell her what the doctor had said. I didn't know how. Instead of driving home, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and did something I never thought I'd do. I typed my father's name into a search engine. David Whitfield, Aspen Hollow, Colorado. Nothing unusual came up. His hardware store's website, an old newspaper photo from a food drive, his profile from the volunteer fire department he used to be part of. Then I remembered something Dr. Reyes had said. Billings, Montana, 15 years ago. I typed in a different search. Missing husband, Billings, Montana construction worker. Dozens of results, most of them irrelevant. But on the third page, I found a local news archive from a paper called the Billings Gazette. A short article, barely a few paragraphs, dated almost 16 years back. Local man vanishes, leaves family without a word. I clicked it before I could talk myself out of it. The article was thin on details. A wife named Karen Doyle, a daughter around 4 years old at the time, a husband who'd worked construction for a local company and simply stopped showing up one Monday. Police had found no signs of foul play. His truck was gone. So was most of the money in their joint account. The article ended with a plea from the wife, asking if anyone had information to please come forward. There was no photo. I sat there with my phone in my lap, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. It didn't prove anything. Men disappeared all the time. Dr. Reyes could be wrong. 16 years was a long time and faces changed. But I couldn't stop thinking about my father's expression in that hospital room. The way his face had drained of color. The way he'd said, "The man's mistaken, a half-second too fast." If it was true, my father had another family somewhere. A daughter who might be my age. A woman named Karen who spent 16 years wondering what happened to her husband.
I drove back to the hospital with my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't sit across from my father at another dinner, watching him pass the mashed potatoes, without asking him the question. Burning a hole through my chest, I found him in the hallway outside Mom's room, drinking bad coffee from a paper cup. "Dad," I said, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to tell me the truth, something." And my voice must have told him this wasn't going to be about what he wanted for dinner. He set the cup down on the windowsill. Who's Karen Doyle? I watched every trace of denial drain out of his face. Not shock, recognition, like he'd been waiting 16 years for someone to finally say that name out loud. Sarah, just tell me if it's true. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I thought he might just walk away. Then he sank into one of the hallway chairs like his legs had given out.
Her name was Karen, he said finally. I was 24. We had a daughter, Emma. His voice cracked on the name, like it hadn't been spoken aloud in years. I wasn't a good husband, Sarah. I wasn't a good father. I was drowning, money, my temper, things I'm not proud of. And instead of getting help, I ran. I took the coward's way out and I never looked back. Because looking back meant facing what I did. You just left them. I left them, he repeated, like the words tasted like poison. I changed my name, moved here, told myself I'd become a different person. And for a long time, I believed my own lie. I didn't know whether to scream at him or cry. Maybe I did both. He told me the rest sitting in that hallway. How he'd built an entire life on a foundation of a name that wasn't his. How my mother had married a man who was still, legally, someone else's husband. How he'd carried that secret through every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday, terrified someone would eventually recognize his face. Someone finally had. The weeks after that were hard. Mom needed time to process what she learned about the man she'd spent 30 years loving. I needed time to understand that the father I knew and the man in that old newspaper article were somehow the same person and also strangers to each other. Dad reached out to a lawyer. Eventually, quietly, he reached out to Emma, the half-sister I never knew I had. Now 36 years old, living 2 states away, who'd spent her whole life wondering why her father had simply vanished. We're still figuring out what happens next. Some wounds don't close just because the truth finally comes out. But I've learned something this year. The people we love completely can still be strangers underneath. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask the question you're most afraid to hear the answer to.